Welcome to the Antisocial Podcast. Hip hip hooray, it's 2019. We are here to stay. That was horrible. Sorry, guys. It's 2019. This is the first episode of the new year. Thank you very much for tuning in. There are no breaks this year. If you're new to the podcast, thank you so much for tuning in and sacrificing a little bit of your precious time in your day to listen to me waffle on right now. Don't fast forward. Promise there's interesting stuff coming. But this is the first episode for 2019. This time last year, I did take a break in January for a month, and it was good, but it sort of threw me off course a little bit. I lost a bit of momentum. So I figured I've been really enjoying this over the past 12 months. And I mean, I've been doing this for the past 3+ years anyway, but the past 12 months have been really, really good. And I just want to keep that momentum going. So straight into 2019, brand new episode, fresh start for the year. Lots of guests coming up. My January is getting packed with potential people to get on the podcast. And it's been really challenging over the last few weeks because getting into the Christmas period, everybody's just really hard to pin down. So I've been doing a lot of week-to-week recordings, which have been a little bit stressful. And poor TY has had to do last-minute edits for me. So thanks, TY, for being patient with me. But January will be ramping it back up. I have a long list of people that I'm just waiting to commit to a day and a time. And I've got some really, really cool people, so stay tuned for that. But if we haven't met, you guys know the drill, but I'm going to dive right into it. I also play bass in the Australian heavy metal band Lord, if you didn't know already. And if you love a bit of heavy metal, you can go to lord.net.au. If you haven't heard our music, we sound a little bit like Iron Maiden, Queensryche, Judas Priest. We've got a little bit of Symphony X in there as well, courtesy of Mark. We've got a new album that's coming out very soon. Stay tuned for that. You can go to lord.net.au and follow us on all the social media platforms, etc., etc. I'll put some announcements in these podcasts as we move forward into the new year further. I've got a few ideas for some special episodes around the around the album on the podcast as well. So we'll see how it goes. I won't jump ahead too quickly. But lord.net.au, go and check it out. I hope you enjoy the tunes. In addition to playing in a metal band, I also host the Self-Starter podcast, which is all about small business, self-employment, and freelancing. So if you want to escape the cubicle or escape your shit job, or you want to earn a little bit of pocket money on the side, or maybe you're just about to launch your own business, or maybe you're in the thick of it and you own your own business and you're just really struggling with a lot of the challenges that self-employment brings, check out Self-Starter. Self-Starter might be for you or might be for somebody that you know. I have been speaking to a number of different people that live and breathe the self-employment world over the past 12 months. A lot of people around this country, especially in regional parts of Australia. And at the moment, at the time of this recording in this episode, I'm in between season 1 and season 2. Season 1 has finished as of the end of 2018, and season 2 will kick off in June. But if you haven't checked out Self-Starter, go and check that out over at selfstarter.com.au. The first season will be up and available for the next 6 months, and I'll probably archive it. And then we'll kick into season 2, where there will be even more an array of guests from all over the country, both regional and metropolitan as well. Selfstarter.com.au, plug. Hope you like it. This week's shout out. We're doing shout outs again for 2019. Last year, I gave myself a challenge that every episode for 2018, I would do a shout out. If you're new to the podcast, each and every week, I thank somebody that supports me, supports one of the podcasts, the band, whatever it might be. And it can be in a range of different ways. It can be messages of encouragement, guest recommendations. It could be reviews on Apple Podcasts or Facebook or Stitcher or blah, blah, blah. It could be shouting me a beer. It could be shouting me a beer, but shouting me a beer via the PayPal button over at andysocial.net. It could be buying some merchandise, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. It all helps me, keeps this podcast moving. It's kept me moving in 2018 and into 2019. And it's all because of you guys supporting this podcast in all those different ways. So thank you so much. But each and every week, the challenge for 2018 was to thank one person each week. That's done something for me, that little 1% more. And I'm going to do that again in 2019 because it's just been really, really good just to give a little bit back. It's the least that I could do, just to say thank you and put it on public record. So this week's shout out, and the first shout out for 2019 is for Kimberly Rayner from where? Brisbane. I was going to write down a suburb in Brisbane, but I didn't write it down. Kimberly is from Brisbane, and Kimberly bought a USB pass and has also sent me a beer shout. So a double whammy. Thank you so much, Kimberly, for supporting the podcast and me personally by shouting me a beer via the PayPal button and also buying the USB pass. Much appreciated. Please send me a message when you hear this. I'm going to send you out a little care pack of a bunch of random goodies that I've got lying around. I'm looking around my room here. I've got a bunch of stuff. So we all like getting something in the post, and it's the least that I could do. But thank you so much for your support. It means a hell of a lot. On the topic of USB passes, and I think I mentioned this in one of the last episodes as well, I've been in the process of archiving a lot of the earlier episodes of the Antisocial podcast at the time of recording this episode. And I think I may have mentioned this in the last episode as well. I have archived the first 90 episodes, I believe. I've left that last 10 between 91 and 100 because there's some, I really want people to hear those episodes. If you haven't heard them, go and check them out. And I'm going to waffle on just for a little bit, just so I can quickly get to the URL so I can tell you what those episodes are. Because if you're new to the podcast, I really want you to know who these guests are so you can go back and have a sticky beak before I archive them for good. Now, episode 91 was Travis New, who was the guitarist in My Sex. He now lives in the US, playing guitar and doing all sorts of great session work. Episode 92 was Oliver Burton, who's an actor. He's a Shakespeare enthusiast and director. Really cool guy. I was completely out of my depth talking about Shakespeare. I've got no idea, but it was a really fun chat, and I think you'll get something out of that. It's a bit of a joke listening to me have a chat to him. Episode 93 was with Dr. Steve Salisbury, who's a paleontologist and dinosaur hunter. Really great chat. Really fun chat, that one. Episode 94 was with Tim Price, who's a music publicist and is the man behind Collision Course PR and The Faction, which is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week music app that you can download, so go and check that out. Episode 95 was with Rodney Holder, who is the man behind Music Business Facts and used to also play in the legendary Australian metal band Alchemist. Episode 96, this is a good one, with Leroy Loggins, the NBL basketball legend for the Brisbane Bullets. I caught up with him a year or so ago in Brisbane, had a face-to-face conversation with him. That was a pinch yourself moment. Really cool. Great episode. Episode 97, another awesome one. They're all awesome. Sorry, guys. Was with Rusty Young, who is the author of Marching Powder and Columbiano. I caught up with him at his house over in North Sydney. Had this really great face-to-face conversation. If you have not read Marching Powder or Columbiano, check them out. Marching Powder is about Rusty actually living in San Pedro prison in Bolivia for about a year or so, I believe. Just an absolute wild story, completely true, and just an amazing person. And he wrote Columbiano as well, which came out in 2018. Really great book. Highly recommended. Episode 98 is with Michael Cusack, the man behind YOLO videos, Damo and Darren. He's an animator behind Gillsbury. He's been doing heaps of work with Adult Swim. He did a special Australian version of Rick and Morty, I believe, and he's just doing heaps of stuff on TV at the moment, Koala Man, and et cetera. So I caught up with him, and great chat there. Episode 99 is with Matthew Bell of Trollholgen, Autumn's Dawn, and Germ. He is in a whole bunch of projects. I think he's in a new project now with Chris from Alstorm and Phil, who used to be in Lagerstein, and I think they're called A Plate Full of Beans or something like that. Anyway, I'll have to get him back on the podcast. That's episode 99. And episode 100, sorry folks, I'm almost there, is with Johnny D of Doro, Brittany Fox, and was also in the band Wasted. Really great guy. I've played shows with him in Japan years and years ago. It was great to learn more about his story and just so many of those pivotal moments in his life, getting the job for Doro, getting the success that he had with Brittany Fox and playing Tokyo Dome with Bon Jovi, just really cool chats. So anyway, I know I'm waffling, folks, but I really wanted to share those episodes. Go and check them out before I archive them along with the other 90 episodes, the first 90 episodes of the podcast. Once these are archived, the only way you'll be able to get them is by getting this USB pass. I was trying to work out how I got to this part of the conversation, but anyway, I'm just talking to myself. You can go and get the USB pass, which has the first 100 episodes of the podcast. There's a bit of bonus content in there as well, so anybody that's got the USB pass will know that bonus content. But soon all those episodes will only be available on the USB pass, and I may eventually put them up as single digital downloads. I've just got to work out the best platform to host all that stuff on. But stay tuned. In the meantime, go and check out those episodes, and hope you enjoy that as well. This week's episode, the first one for 2019, is with Leon Todd. Leon is the guitarist for Perth rock band Ragdoll. Really, really cool melodic rock band. If you, I'm going to butcher this, sorry, Leon. If you love 80s rock, and even some modern rock as well. It's a great mix. But really, if you love 80s rock, you will love Ragdoll. Massive fan. I'm going to put a bunch of songs in the show notes over at andysocial.net, so you can go and check that out. Leon's also got a YouTube channel, which he reviews a lot of different guitar gear, does a lot of playthrough videos, a lot of instructional stuff. His YouTube channel is so impressive. As of the time that I was doing this conversation with Leon, his YouTube channel had 2.4 million views across the whole channel. He's got 11,000 subscribers. He's got different manufacturers, brands hitting him up and sending him stuff to feature on his channel. He's just doing really, really cool stuff. And this was such a good chat. So many parallels between what I've been doing from a musician point of view, transitioning into podcasting, and for him as well, doing the same thing, but going into doing YouTube videos and content online. And just a lot of really cool stuff that bounced off each other in this chat. We talk about a whole range of different things. We talk a lot about Ragdoll and some of the success that the band's had over the years, the trips to the US, some really, really cool stories as well. But I'll let Leon do all the talking. I do a bit of talking as well. You guys know the drill from my end. But if you want to check out more, you can go to, where do we start? ragdollrock.bandcamp.com. You can search for Ragdoll on Facebook. I'll put Spotify links. There's a Triple J on Earth page. I'll put Leon's YouTube channel in the show notes as well. You can search for Leon Todd on Facebook. He's on Twitter and Instagram as well. You should be able to click on the show notes through your podcast player right now, or if you're listening via the website, just scroll down. All the links are there. Enough of me, as always. For the first episode of 2019, please enjoy this really, really cool chat with Leon Todd of Ragdoll. Man, you've heard this podcast a few times in the past, and you know that I stalk people and I do a little bit of snooping around on the internet, and I see your videos popping up on my Facebook feed, and linking some stuff on Twitter and everything like that, and I get a grasp, and I go, you're putting together some really high quality videos. Great guitar player, of course, and great taste in music, all these great things. And then I go to your YouTube channel and I have a bit more of a look than I have in the past. And you've got like freaking 2.4 million views across your channel, and there's like 11,000 subscribers.
Yeah, and a lot of that's been the last year as well. So it's just become this animal that I have no control over, it seems like. But it's been really, really interesting seeing all of that develop. So yeah, I mean, that's something obviously I spend a lot of my time doing now, amongst all the other little bits and pieces. So yeah, it's good fun.
I mean, for years, you've had Ragdoll as this, at least from my perspective anyway, seeming to be the main focal point and putting a lot of that energy into the band and getting out there and doing a lot of touring, and then having this YouTube channel. Is it similar? I mean, I can only sort of compare with my own journey with doing all the Lord stuff and then getting into podcasting, where you suddenly start to like open up this whole new world where you've got this secondary sort of identity that in some senses sort of competes almost at the same level as what your identity was with the band. Is it similar for you?
It's when you asked me to do the interview, I immediately thought it's like, yeah, this is going to be like a great thread to pick up on, because it seems so similar. And obviously, I've known about Lord like forever, because when I was a teenager getting into guitar, like I fell in love with power metal, and it's like, it seemed like at the time there was like 3 power metal bands in the Southern Hemisphere. So it's one of those things where it's like, it's always sort of been there and aware. And then I think because of social media, it's sort of like, this guy Andy, he seems okay. He's seems like we have a lot in common. Oh, he's got a podcast. What a weird thing to do. And then because it's maybe been the last 2 or 3 years that I've even listened to podcasts, and then watching it kind of just explode. Well, maybe explode isn't the right word. I think it's sort of like podcasting has like reached saturation point in the market now, where it's one of the main ways people consume media, and one of the main ways I think a lot of people get a lot of information. Now I'm a full podcast freak, obviously. So I think there's a lot of similarities there, where I'm sure you probably just started it as like, well, this is something I'm vaguely interested in and I don't know anything about it. And I'll just, I know for me with YouTube, it's like, well, maybe if I do this, I can push myself to learn some new skills and get better at a bunch of things that I wish I was good at.
Did you have a sort of a point behind getting it started? I mean, obviously, yeah, to develop your own skills and get better as a player and a person and all of that. But was there sort of an intention behind it to think, oh, well, this is another type of media that will push the branding of you as a guitarist, but also just the band name and the band identity? Was it sort of, because for me, like with the podcast, it was I fell in love with podcasting, just listening to podcasts, and I just thought, this is incredible. This is such a weird and unusual way to digest information, where I was listening to, very similar types of stuff that I do now, where it's just long form, conversations, where it's not even like a stock standard Q&A interview that everyone got sick and tired of. And I just thought, this would be really cool to do, like this really sneaky, indirect way of promoting the band by me just crapping on for an hour or so. And then just, if anyone tunes in, then that's great. And it'll hopefully bring some more people to the band. But, not too long after I got it started, I realized that this is sort of like creating a monster on its own. And the band, the band sort of benefits from it, but not so much. And it's more about me and my own journey, and the band sort of comes into context every once in a while in conversation, but it's surpassed the initial intention of what the podcast was. But was that sort of similar to you with the YouTube channel?
Yeah, 100%. Like I said, I think it's a perfect analogy. Not something I ever intended getting into. A good friend of mine, to sort of go back, when I got into playing in bands, which I'm 30. Well, I turned 30 this year, so I was born in 1988. Got into guitar when I was about 14 or 15, really seriously, and maybe 4 or 5 years later than that, I started wanting to get into bands, and there was the one place to go, which was sort of like the thing that killed off like the classifieds ad in the street press in Perth. Anyway, was a forum called perthbands.com, and it was just sort of like you just got on there and like everybody was on there. I remember early days, I think it was the guys from Birds of Tokyo had an ad up, like, looking for a drummer or a bass player, or, we're starting this new band, this is what it's called, and, we need an extra band member. And, the guys from Eskimo Joe were on there, and Carnival, and sort of like, it's now, I guess, when people say like Perth music or Perth heavy music or Perth alternative music, what a lot of people would associate with those guys. It was like the one place where everybody would just go on and be like, it was sort of like the big support network. Like, hey, we need a band last minute to do a gig, or we need a new guitar player, or I want to buy a new amp. What do I do? So there was a friend of mine on there who started building effects pedals. And he just sort of started out really basic. And I remember a friend of mine got him to build him something, and I tried it, and it was really good. And I was kind of like, whoa, this is really interesting. I need to get in touch with this guy. It's still in my head. This is my buddy John, but his name on perthbands.com, the old forum, was Johnny C. And I just remember messaging him and being like, hey, can you build me a pedal? Because I'd be really, you've built some stuff for a few of my friends, and it sounds really great. And he ended up doing that, and then he said, oh, you've got the means to record a few things. Could you do a little demo video for me? And I'll put it up on my website. And at the time, he was doing sort of like little YouTube videos and stuff like that. I think he had figured out if you do really specific things at the time, this is more than 10 years ago, you know, you can monetize them and you can make a little bit of money off them. And like he was saying, it's like, you know, his most popular video still is like, you know, how to change the oil in your car or something like that, you know, something really, and it sort of made him enough money to, you know, buy a few beers a month or something. And he would, anytime he had like a new thing, he would always say, hey, can you do a little video for me? Or, you know, could you do me a favor? And eventually that turned into, hey, if I give you one of these new pedals, can you produce something for me? And he's kind of the person who I blame for all of this. And, you know, he always encouraged me with that kind of thing. And, probably about this time 2 years ago, he basically approached me and said, hey, look, you know, at the time I'd been just doing a few little videos because I got like a GoPro or something that made it really easy to just film yourself playing guitar. And he kind of said, hey, look, I want to just sort of take this a little bit, you know, the sort of social media side of it a little bit more. And I know you manage your band's social media accounts, and, you know, would you be interested in working out some kind of little deal where we can work together? And from that, he said, you know, you should really push your YouTube channel as a way to kind of promote the band. And yeah, so from there, I was in a really fortunate situation where my wife she was doing a lot of concert photography when I met her. So she's got a great camera, which I didn't know you could film things with. And I just basically pinched that off her. And in, you know, the spare time I had, I would make little demo videos of all the stuff that I own, because I'm like a gear hoarder. I have so many weird guitars and amplifiers and things. It was just kind of a way to be like, well, you know, I'd go on YouTube and look something up and be like, oh, no one's done a demo of this amp or this pedal, or so I just kind of, you know, try to fill these little holes in the algorithm, basically. And yeah, from there, you know, just as I said, it was always a way for me, you know, if I wanted to figure out how to do something, can I teach myself it? And hopefully it'll either be fine and people will say, hey, cool video, or it'll be so bad that people will be like, hey, you're doing it totally wrong. Here's what you should do. So it's kind of one of those kind of bootstrapping kind of things. And yeah, so that's, I guess for me, that's how the YouTube thing got started. And probably about this time last year, I started getting approached by companies who are saying, hey, we like your videos. Can we send you some stuff and can you make some content for it? And I think that's kind of where I started seeing it more of like, okay, cool. It's not just somebody sitting around playing guitar, it's content. And much like, you know, whether it's podcasting or, you know, whether it's video blogging or whatever it is people do, but it's just another form of content for people to consume and enjoy. And it's like a tangential thing to the band. Obviously, if they like what I do, they like the way that I play and they like the kind of things that I'm into, more often than not, they'll end up enjoying Ragdoll, because a lot of it's stuff that I learned with Ragdoll.
The good thing about your channel is that there's no mystery behind what it's about, and you've niched down. I mean, it's hard to use the word niche when it comes to guitar, because guitar is so just the topic of creating a YouTube channel surrounding, you know, the world of guitar. It can be so varied and there's so much there to work with, but it's still a niche topic in the grand scheme of things. And so when people come to your channel, you can sort of get a grasp of what it's all about really quickly. And for some people, they sort of freak out and think, oh, I'm getting pushed into a corner. But for others, it's really powerful because, I mean, you'd know this for sure. You can find your audience so quickly, and you don't have to put yourself out there in this really bland and diluted way. You can really sort of hone in on things that you're passionate about and have this focus, and people will come to you. And the fact that you're in a position now, and you mentioned before, like you've been this gear hoarder over the years, and you've got this real passion for acquiring all these different pieces of equipment over the years, but now getting to a point where people are approaching you and offering you things to be able to feature in your videos. I mean, it's sort of like, I mean, that's the dream, isn't it? That's what you want.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I listened, I think it was last week or something, the That's What I Reckon episode that you had, which I just absolutely love that guy's videos. And I loved that podcast with him where he was kind of saying, you know, people are approaching me to advertise things because they think that I'm an influencer, where it's like, why would I want to do that? Like they obviously don't, they just look at the numbers and they don't really understand like the ethos behind what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I think the difference there with me is it's like, well, I kind of hate gear and I hate talking about gear and I hate all the sort of like mythology behind stuff, but I just want stuff that works that I can make music with. And I think for like half of my life, I've been trying to like eliminate the need for gear, but in a really like messed up roundabout way. It just meant I accumulated a lot of it because it's sort of like, well, this is the perfect thing to do this and I don't have to think about it anymore. But then I want to go and play this other style of music, so I need the thing that's going to make me not need to think about it. So it's like a catch-22 in that regard. But I think the with that, as you said, because it's such a niche, and definitely the way I approach it is sort of like, well, I'm not out to make anything sound good or bad. I just really, the only aim really is that like, is to kind of be transparent, which is obviously hard because I like a certain style, certain styles of music and I play a certain way and approach sounds a certain way. But it's more a case of like, okay, cool. And the challenge for it, and I think the thing that I've really liked about it that has, broadened my horizons as a player and a musician is like, okay, cool. I actually need to think about someone more than myself. Like there's a certain way that I'd use a piece of gear and I'll show people how to do that. But then it's like, how would I say somebody who's not me approach it, or how might you approach it? And I find that part of it really interesting. So, and obviously, with guitar gear, it's like the more stuff I can try, the better it is for me. Bottom line, because I'm always looking for that piece of gear that will make things a little bit easier, which this came from touring and using backline and just consistently being let down by how crappy most stuff is. So finding stuff that's like that just works, and because I think with guitar players as well, it's such an odd demographic. A lot of guitar gear is marketed as professional gear, where really it's like prosumer gear. It's gimmicky, and if you look at what a lot of professionals use, some of them have crazy rigs, but a lot of people now plug, a mid-tier price guitar, something that might cost $1,500 to $2,000, into like a digital modeling thing the size of a lunchbox, and plug that into a PA, and then that's their whole rig. It's not like a giant wall band, but there is that prosumer element of it where a lot of people just play guitar for fun, or they do it as a way to release. So they want this audio visual experience, and they want to wrap themselves up in the mythology of, this is the type of pedal that Jimi Hendrix would have plugged into. And I think part of the fun with that is I'll almost look at like guitar as like a virtual reality experience a lot of the time. You plug in and you make noise and you close your eyes and, you imagine that it's 1969 and you're Hendrix at Monterey Pop Festival or whenever it was, and everybody's losing their mind, and you open your eyes up again and, you're just on your lunch break and you go back and work in an office. So I think all of those viewpoints are really valid too.
Do you have a history of doing sort of guitar tutoring or lessons and teaching other people guitar?
Yeah, basically the first and only. Sorry, just take a little drink. Kind of the first and only real job that I've had is teaching music. I got into it when I'd only been playing for a year or two, and I just had a family friend who had someone who was a few years younger than me, and they wanted to learn a few chords. And I got into teaching them that way. And I think by the end of year 12, I had 4 or 5 guitar students, which when you're 17, to be making like $200 or $300 a week for a few hours sitting around playing guitar.
That's pretty good.
Not having to get a job at KFC or Macca's it's amazing, I could afford to buy all this cool stuff that I wanted. And I actually spent nearly all of it on CDs, because it was right about the time that JB Hi-Fi just decimated the market and took over everything. And suddenly, if I wanted to buy an Iron Maiden album, it wasn't $35; it was like $10.
Yeah.
So I've got this giant CD collection sitting in a corner now that, because of, I guess, digital media, like Spotify, which, I use all the time. I mean, I listen to your podcasts on there, and I almost exclusively use that. So, but yeah, that's definitely my background. And I still do a lot of private tuition with that. And then the other side of it, the secret life is I'm like a lapsed academic as well. I did a 4-year degree at university in maths and science, and sort of I was around that environment a lot. And I was around that environment a lot as a kid, because that's what my dad did as well. He worked at a university and tutored and taught, and it's one of those things. I think I've been exposed to it from such a young age that it seems, not that it comes naturally, but it's more like seeing it as a valid vocation that you can do, which might not be the thing. I guess if you just, if you grow up under a different set of circumstances, probably something a lot of people never consider.
I'll have to come back to that maths and science thing, because that I had no idea. And as you said, it's a little bit of a secret side to yourself. But
yeah.
There's a rabbit hole there, but I won't step into it just yet. But the reason why I asked about whether you did lessons in sort of tuition for other people is that's one thing that I noticed straight away when I looked at some of your videos on YouTube. The way that you've got this sort of, and I'm blowing smoke up your ass a bit, but you got this natural tendency of being able to communicate on a very sort of it's a very accessible level. Like it's just very digestible. It's very easy to understand, and you're not getting too techie with people. You can, and you do at times, but it's digestible in a way that it's very sort of teacher student, and not in a condescending way either. I'm struggling to articulate in the right way, but I noticed that straight away. I thought you must have a little bit of experience of just sitting down with somebody else and teaching somebody how to play guitar, or going through that sort of process of having that dynamic between yourself and somebody else.
Yeah, definitely. And that definitely helped, I think, getting into doing video stuff. The only difference is when it's sort of like when you're sitting down with a student, you have this like immediate feedback cycle where, you can suggest something to them, and then you can watch them try it, and then it's either going to work or it's not going to work. And if it does work, you can really encourage them and, kind of egg them on to keep doing it and build their confidence. And if it doesn't work, then you just try something else immediately. And the difference is doing, like, say, a YouTube video or something, is that it takes 24 to 48 hours to get that feedback and then re-implement it into something else. So it's sort of like an ongoing thing with that. But all my favorite, whether it's music or whether it's, hearing, listening to a podcast with my favorite comedian or my favorite writer or any of that kind of stuff. I'm a big fan of history podcasts, which is, I've been really vaguely interested in history for a long time, but there's a few history podcasts that I just absolutely love. And I mean, obviously, history is such a dense, diverse topic that can be really hard to digest. But hearing people break down really complicated stuff in that kind of arena, I kind of get a lot of ideas from there, where it's like, okay, cool. Most of the people listening to this aren't going to understand anything about, say you're listening to a podcast about the Roman Empire, and most people aren't going to understand the ins and outs of how, like, military units work, or how the Roman legal system worked or something. And I mean, it's not something I'm super interested in. I just want to know who the cool guys were and what they did. And listening to those things and the way people break those down, I kind of always have in the back of my head, it's like, how could I do this with music, or how could I do it with guitar? And as I said earlier, there's so much kind of like guitarists, and especially music, especially rock music, it's just like there's kind of mythology behind it, where we look at the great bands or the great players or the great writers, and we almost tell ourselves like, well, they obviously were fundamentally different in some way to you or me, and I always kind of like to try to bust that down a little bit, and that's my goal with a lot of things. Okay, cool, you know, if you're trying to sound like Tony Iommi, you know, there's things that you can do, or there's things that you can buy that won't help you, but it's more about things that you can do with your playing, or it's about approaching it in a particular way, or it's about understanding something about, you know, the dynamic of, say, Black Sabbath as a band, as an example, or something like that. So that kind of, yeah, just trying to like incorporate, keep it like holistic is not the right word. I really dislike that term, but try to just like broaden the discussion around a lot of these things, maybe is a better way to say it.
I think one thing that I've seen pop up quite a bit in conversation recently is when people are being taught something, you have to get, especially as you said before, going into something and making an assumption, and not in a condescending or a negative way, but making the assumption that the person on the other end doesn't know much or anything about the topic that's about to be discussed. And you have to give somebody a really easy win straight away. And that's either, you know, through instruction, through practice, or whatever it might be, or just giving information. People need something to grab onto straight away that's really easy. There's no pain or friction involved, but it's just enough buy-in to convince somebody that, wow, there's something here. And then people start to get more curious and start to dig in further, and then they start to put effort in because they can see the value, they can see something out of it. But some of the worst teachers out there are the ones that go from 0 to 100 straight away, get right into the complexity of it and struggle to articulate, you know, the essence behind it, and you just lose people straight away. And that's I mean, this is another topic altogether, but like just, you know, schooling, and I'm sure you went through similar sort of experiences as a kid. You know, some teachers worked really well because they were able to talk on a level that was digestible and you could identify with it, and other people just spoke over your head. And you know the information that you retained all these years later, and the stuff that went in one ear and out the other. And, you know, on your YouTube channel, just the way, like, it's such a skill to be able to pass a message on to somebody else and do it in a way that is going to get buy-in, because you can have an expert, somebody that's really well skilled in whatever it is, but to try and get them to explain what they do, for a lot of people, they struggle and they can't actually spell out how they go through a sequence of steps, or how they approach a subject, or even explain, you know, the complexity or the detail behind what they're passionate about. But there are a number of people out there that are quite skilled that can just break it right down and just go, this is what the topic is, and here are the bite-sized pieces of information, and here's the exciting stuff, or here's the really juicy stuff that you can grab onto straight away, and then we'll go from there. And as you develop more interest, then you can start getting into some of the stuff that might not be as exciting, but you've already built that appreciation, and you're searching for that value, so you're more open to that buy-in. But it's something that I'm fascinated by, people that are able to really sort of cross that gap.
Yeah, I think you have to sort of you almost have to keep your inner child intact. I always think about that, you know, especially say with my YouTube channel being focused around music and focused around guitar. There's a lot of guys who love rock music and a lot of guys who love heavy metal. That's probably and you know, I look at the analytics as well on my channel, and it tells you the audience, and it's, I think, like 40-something% of my audience is in the United States, as opposed to about 5 is in ex-highest, which is Australia, and maybe 5% in Canada and Germany, and the rest is sort of frittered around. So there's that big focus there in the States, and then the rest of it's quite spread out, that, like, you know, 98.5% of my audience is male, which, from what I understand, with a platform like YouTube does seem to be like a male-dominated platform, as opposed to, I'm sure if I was trying to do what I was doing on Tumblr, the audience might look a little bit different. Yeah, I mean, something, if you think about, if you kind of think about that, it's sort of like, okay, cool, well, I'm mostly speaking to men between the age of like 15 and 40 who like rock music and metal music. I still remember what it was like being 15 years old and hearing like Number of the Beast, for example, and being this kid who was like skateboarding and hearing this song come on and go, oh my God, what is this thing? I play a bit of guitar, but I don't know how to do that with a guitar. It almost sounds like an alien playing it. And sort of always trying to remember that, like having that sense of wonder around it. I think it's really easy. Music is, I have this discussion with people a lot. It's like music is like one of the last remaining things that people aren't really cynical about. In the sense that, like, everybody always complains that the pop music of their generation is the worst. And that the good music of their generation, it's never getting enough airtime. Not that kind of thing. I mean, like, people will unashamedly love styles of music. If you're like a metalhead, you won't really be too cynical about loving heavy metal. It's just like, well, yeah, of course. This is my favorite style of music. Where it almost seems like everything else we do, people are kind of like apologizing for their passions, or we call them, guilty pleasures or something like that. Except music. Everybody always, we tend to identify our taste in music with like our identity. It's often a they're very closely correlated things. If you see someone walking down the street and they're wearing Docs and they've got a mohawk and a denim vest with like a Misfits patch on the back, you almost immediately know it's like that person is going to like punk. And if you start talking to them about, you say, oh, hey, I love that band, immediately you've got something in common. So yeah, backtracking, it's like music's one of the last things that we can be cynical about, which is kind of nice, because if you're trying to like approach teaching it, most of the time being like a 15-year-old is pretty terrible. Like if you look back on your teenage years at what you wore and, the ideas that you had, it's all like, oh, geez, that's a bit, that was definitely a phase. I can see why my parents said that. But trying to stay in touch with that thing, it's like, yeah, okay, cool. When I heard Iron Maiden for the first time, I wanted to know like kind of the process behind that. So a big part of teaching for me is, rather than have people get fixated on, it's because this, and this, it's like, no, actually have a peek behind the curtain, have a look at like, the elements of music that make that up, and, the little bit of the theory behind it, or a little bit of the like motivation for why these guys wrote these songs. And like I was saying earlier, look at it in that sort of broader context, without being, because I'm really lucky working in that kind of medium where everyone loves one form of music or another. So no one's ever going to feel like it's condescending, and everybody has this sort of like, there's like a little bit more implied knowledge there, as opposed to someone who, they're obviously like a legit YouTube sensation is like Eddie Wu, which I think you had him on recently, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. What he's doing is infinitely harder than what I'm doing, because most people hate maths, and like really, really, really feel strongly about it and have these negative emotions attached to it because of, I guess, probably because of school, more often than not because of like a school teacher they had. But in that kind of case, it's like that his job's so much harder because the people who are going to be watching it don't want to know about it. It's like, oh, please spare me having to revisit the worst part of my childhood. Whereas a lot of the time for me, it's like, listening to music or playing guitar is, if someone's either going through it, if they're a teenager, it's probably the best thing about their life, the way they see it, or they're a little bit older and they're sort of nostalgic for that simpler time of their life when they look back and go, when I was 15 and I was, getting into guitar or whatever it was. So I feel like in that sense, there's like the slightly less ignorance around the topic and slightly less cynicism around the topic, which just makes it, and it really makes it a joy for me.
Well, there's an emotional element around music that, brings people in straight away, and people get really passionate, no matter which end of the spectrum they're sitting on. And you nailed on the head with that word nostalgia. Like people will throw themselves back into a time where music is like the soundtrack to whatever defining moment is happening in somebody's life. And so that initial buy-in is so much easier because you're already sparking something with somebody. But I mean, the thing that sort of separates, I guess, you know, just talking about YouTube and content and getting information out there and connecting with people and building an audience. Yes, it's like, it's the topic, and some topics are a lot harder to sort of translate and get out there and be digestible for the audience. But really it comes down to the person, the messenger, the person who's representing that and how they can pass that information on. I mean, you know, YouTube is the mecca of guitar videos. You know, if you want a guitar video, you go to YouTube, and you could almost get to a point where in some cases it's so oversaturated because there is just so much there. I mean, it was a great idea years and years ago and everyone's jumped on board. But, you know, I can watch a guitar video from somebody who's really dull and lifeless and can't explain it properly, and they might be playing like a really, really cool riff from, you know, and I've seen you do some George Lynch stuff, like, you know, some classic Dokken riffs, and I'm watching it, and I'm just going, yeah, that's cool, like, it's not bad. And they talk and you sort of go, yeah, okay, anyway, and you move on to the next video. But then if you've got someone that's got, you know, that character, that personality, they're really engaging, there's a bit of humor there, and they're talking on a level that's really, you can identify with them, and you almost, it's sort of like, I like that person. Like, there's something about them that I like personally, just from their mannerisms, their characteristics and things like that. And I think that's what you certainly started to achieve over the last couple of years and built up this following. And someone like Eddie Wu, I mean, as you said, like, his topic is so much harder to try and get out there, but the guy's personality is so infectious that, like, even for me, like, I didn't have the greatest run in school when it came to mathematics, and, you know, I don't have the fondest of memories, but I started watching a few of the videos and I found myself being far more open-minded and not so judgmental, and not jumping too quickly to the conclusion that this is not for me, or this is too hard, or what's the purpose of this, because he was engaging and he seemed so warm and inviting that anybody could listen to this information. And I'm not here just to talk to the people who are intelligent and mathematically inclined or anything like that. I'm this personable individual that's out here, and if you want to listen, then please, like, I'd love to be able to talk to you and show you this information. And I think that's part of it. That's that little point of difference that can make such a massive impact on you know, talking about YouTube channels anyway.
Yeah, I really like the way you said it. I think it took me about 5 minutes to try and explain it, but you summed it up in 2 words. It's like the buy-in. Like, what's the with any form of social media, especially, it's like there's this sort of like minimum cost associated with it. You know, the buy-in. It's like, well, how much do I actually have to invest if I want to get something out of this? And I think with especially a lot of guitar videos on YouTube, the buy-in's like a little bit too high for most people. It's people, you know, approach it from this sort of, especially, I think, because a lot of people who make guitar videos, it's like, it's so dominated by the American market, and that kind of like there's this big like guitar bro kind of thing, which I really, there's so many people like that, where it's sort of they're trying to make it approachable, and it's actually having the opposite effect. It's almost like they're trying to turn it into like sport or something. Which, you know, it's like, I love sport, like played footy and cricket growing up. I'm always obsessed with like stuff like that. But I always feel like treating music like sport is often, it's not the best approach for a lot of musicians, because a lot of musicians, face it, hate sport. I think a lot of it comes, I'm sure you've encountered this as well as a podcaster, is like, there's something about like Australian culture as well, and the way, you know, a lot of it is actually bad, like the kind of tall poppy syndrome thing in Australian culture, which is very prevalent. But when it comes to like approaching making content, I think it sort of works in a good way, because you, for me anyway, I find, you know, there's Brett Kingman, who's he's like the godfather of gear demos on YouTube. He's been doing it for so long. But he's just an Aussie bloke, you know, and that's how he just approaches it. It's no nonsense. It's, g'day everybody, here's a pedal, let's see what it does. You know, there's no like overselling or overhyping or anything. It's almost like that understated element that you kind of get as from growing up in Australia. You never really want to oversell yourself or come across as arrogant, which, you know, I know if anybody who's played in bands ever listening to this, it has the opposite effect there when you're trying to promote something, because as soon as you kind of say, hey, we're a band and we've done a thing which we think is good, people sort of go, oh, what, you think it's good? Why do you think it's good? What makes you think you're so good, kind of thing? So, yeah, but it's sort of like the wonder of YouTube, because it's so dominated by this like overhyping kind of thing, that being understated comes across as fresh when really it's like the only way I know how to do anything.
It's using those that evil part of our culture for good. It's there's definitely a pro that comes to it, because I mean, whenever someone just talks about tall poppy syndrome in Australia, and I've certainly covered it heaps of times in chats with people, because it's one of those things where I've certainly noticed it over the last few years of, putting myself out there, doing podcasting and not hiding behind a band name as just a musician, as part of a collective. It's like, oh, here I am, here's my name, and my freaking name is in the podcast title. So it's sort of like you go through all those feelings of what our culture has been about, where you sort of think, are people going to call me out? Are they going to say that I'm full of shit, I'm a bit of a wanker, egotistical and all that sort of stuff? And you start to, it's not the right word, but the first word that came to mind is compromise. And when you say the word compromise, it sounds like it's I'm saying it in a negative light, but it's exactly what you said. You start to adjust a little bit, because you don't want to be conveyed in a way that people will react negatively to you, but you don't do it in a way that is negatively impacting yourself. And so you do come across as that, or you try your best to come across as that sort of very down to earth, no bullshit, sort of, this is who I am, I'm not trying to put on a show, and if you like it, fantastic. If you don't, you don't, and that's cool. And I'm not trying to be something that I'm not. And it's a very hard balance, I think, for a lot of us in Australia, because we're constantly at that battle to try and work out what that balance is. And I'm always fascinated with people in the United States, because they've got this culture of really beefing themselves up and encouraging people to really sort of put their neck out and say how great they are and what they do. And I think there's a real great aspect to that. I think there's a really sort of positive element to really encouraging people to stand up and say what they love, what they are good at, what they're passionate about. But like with us, there's a balance there that they need to find as well, and sometimes that can go against them. So it's a really difficult thing, and I think we do have an advantage at times, because we talk on such a very down to earth level, and a very digestible level, and a way that many people can identify with us. And using the band setting, I mean, for us, I think we've always been so self-conscious about the way that we're portrayed. We always say that we take our music seriously, but we don't take ourselves seriously. So we're the first ones.
Oh, exactly.
We're the first ones to take the piss out of ourselves. We'll do it. It's almost like the coping mechanism that you have in school when you start a new year or a new school, and you're quick to take the piss out of yourself, or say how crap you are, or whatever features you're uncomfortable about with yourself. You'll quickly point all them out so no one else can attack you first. And we sort of do that as a band. It's sort of like we know where the targets are. We know what people could potentially take the piss out of ourselves, and let's just do it to ourselves, because we don't really care that much. And so let's make fun of this, and let's do it in an enjoyable way that it's sort of like people can really warm to us. We're on the same level. We're not high and mighty. We're not above anybody else. We're exactly the same, only we're playing music as well. And when you listen to the music, then you'll see where like the music will do is talking on its own. We don't have to talk about it in that sense. So, but it's a bit of a psychological nightmare at times, because you're trying to find that balance and you don't know what it is. And sometimes you just have to go with your gut and just roll with it.
Yeah. And I've found anytime I've done anything, whether it's, YouTube or it's life in general, or especially with the band, those moments when you almost don't do something, like you're second guessing yourself too much, and you kind of go, you know what, if people don't like it, that's their problem. You know, I like it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to put it out. They've always been the things which have sort of gone over the best for us. And I guess we were really fortunate, maybe 5 or 6 years ago now. We got booked to play a festival in the States, and, you know, we've been gigging around in Perth for a few years and had just released, you know, our first EP and stuff like that. And literally just a friend of a friend passed it on to somebody who booked a side stage at a festival in the middle of America. And, you know, like 2 months later, we're on a plane going, well, okay, what the hell do we do? You know, how do we sell ourselves? How do we approach this? And getting exposed to that culture you described, that almost like everyone's like really egging one another on, you know, to try to get the best out of each other. And going over and being like an Australian band was just immediately this like commodity, you know, because we still joke to ourselves. It's like, yeah, in America we're big in Australia. In Australia we're big in America, because no matter where we play, somebody comes up and says, "Oh man, it's just so awesome to see you guys killing it in America." Because, you know, we went over the first time and we went over like 5 years in a row, you know, and it was nothing glamorous at all. But the perception at home was that because we're going back, obviously we're doing something right. And the perception there was, because we've come from the other side of the world, we must be doing real well in Australia to break out of that market. So, yeah, you just kind of roll with it and, you know, nod along and just try to play as good as you can. You know, that's what we kind of discovered. And it's being exposed to that culture and that market really helped us be ourselves. You know, I think listening back to what we were trying to do when we started the band, was this almost like a compromise in sort of like in the negative sense, you know. It's like, whereas now it's when we write music, we're like halfway through recording and writing another album at the moment. It's so much more just kind of like the discussion of like, what are people going to think about this just has never happened. It happened the first time we ever recorded anything, and it just doesn't happen anymore. We just kind of aim to please ourselves. And, you know, we've sort of been around long enough now and put in enough groundwork where there's enough of a small audience there that really likes what we do. And then doing the YouTube thing for me is like it's like another way to approach that market. That, you know, people obviously sort of, if you're an avid listener and watcher of my channel, it's like there's little bits of Ragdoll songs and upcoming material in there. So it's almost like a sort of like little Easter eggs that I drop in there all the time, just to sort of, you know, keep a bit of a buzz going. But yeah, it's in that sort of sense. I just realized that you can only, the only good version of anybody you can be is a good version of yourself.
It takes a while to actually get to that point, though. I mean,
oh man, yeah.
It depends on the time of the day. Sometimes I think I'm all right and I've reached that point, and come back to me in an hour and I'm sort of questioning everything again. But I think that's one of those things where, I mean, that's just life in general. You know, life's just a constant roller coaster of just experience and taking in so much data on a day-to-day basis. And, you know, just especially now, like, we've got so much stuff at our fingertips, so, you know, you're constantly being influenced and exposed to so many different perspectives and insights and ideas and all this sort of stuff. So, you know, when you're at that point where you think you got everything and you're under control, and then something comes from left side and you go, oh geez, all right, okay, no, I don't need to rethink everything again. But like, with the US stuff, because I mean, that's going to be one of the things I was going to mention to you, because that perception thing is so important. I mean, being an Australian musician, and for anyone that's listening and doesn't understand the dynamic at play as far as location is concerned, like, you're on one side of the country, I'm on the other. And the mentality, and I've spoken with this a few of the other Perth guests on the podcast, you know, being in Western Australia is a challenge when it comes to creativity and being a musician. And obviously Perth has produced all these amazing artists across a whole range of different genres and different mediums and etc. And it's been this great hub in such a small concentrated area. But as far as getting out and even just getting over to the East Coast can be such an ordeal. So for me, like as an East Coast Australian musician, I mean, my perception of you guys for a long time is that it was just this Perth rock band and that was about it. And you didn't really see a great deal else. And so you heard a few tracks, yeah, that's not bad, but it was just, I guess early on in the piece was sort of that perception that it was just sort of this local Perth band that was doing all right in Perth. And then, I don't know, I must have just stopped paying attention. Then suddenly, and I think you were alluding to Rocklahoma, the festival that you did over in the US.
Yeah, that's a festival I mentioned earlier, yeah.
Yeah, and so I saw that pop up, and then I saw this perception of you guys absolutely killing it in the US and going over there all the time. And I guess from a musician point of view, I can certainly appreciate the sacrifice, the investment, and how big of an ordeal it is to get anywhere as a musician, even to get out of your own town, let alone interstate, international, etc. And to do it multiple years in a row and to be a band based in Perth as well, it's just one of those things where you look and go, they're doing some big things. And regardless of the reality of it, the perception is so valuable. And it's really interesting to hear you talk about it that way where, you know, if you're over there, they're talking about how great you guys must be back here. And then here, the locals are thinking that you must be absolutely killing it in the US. And I'm always big on perception with our band and trying to do our best to portray ourselves in a way that we're larger than life, but going back to that balance of trying to be still taking the piss out of ourselves, but the music does the talking. And it's such a complex and convoluted sort of approach.
Yeah.
But, for you guys, I mean, and you mentioned 5 years in a row going to the US. I mean, what sort of approach did you guys sort of have this plan that I won't use the term 5-year plan because it's so wanky, but did you guys have this plan that you were going to invest and commit to a degree of time to just throw it all in and just see what comes of it? Or was it more of a case of you go over for that first time and then afterwards it's like more opportunities started to pop up and it's like, okay, well, what can we do, and just sort of ride it as it comes?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really, like, thinking of, I guess where my head was at the time. Like, I was, when did this happen? 2012. I was like 23 years old. I mean, basically, I finished university when I'd been out of uni for maybe a year and a half. And like I said, I did a completely different thing. And I had met Cam, our drummer, probably when I was maybe 19. And again, that was actually through MySpace, because I had a MySpace page with just a bunch of like me playing guitar on there again. So yeah, kids, if you want to do anything and like just put yourself playing guitar on the internet somewhere on whatever platform it is. But, and they, these local guys got in touch with me. I ended up sort of joining this little band, and it was very much like a sort of 80s, like we wanted to be Racer X basically, yeah, or nice. Dokken, like, and we could just never find anyone to sing these songs, because I mean, who wants to sing like Don Dokken, 5 nights a week? But not even Don Dokken sounds like Don Dokken anymore. So, yeah. And we remember getting this message on MySpace from this guy, and he said, "Hey, the idea of your band sounds great. I would love to try out. I play in a cover band on Wednesday nights at a club. Come down, check it out, and you can hear me do what I do." And we were like, this guy plays in a cover band? Gross. We're like 18, 19 at the time. Yeah. Must be, it can't be that good. And then, we're looking at his MySpace page, and it's like, we sort of found out, it's like, oh my God, this guy's married as well. Like, whoa, nah, you can't, bro.
Red flag.
That's not what Motley Crue would do. And anyway, about a year later, we were like auditioning singers or something. And then, this one guy tried out, and he said, "Oh, you got to come see my band." And so we went down, and, there's this 5-piece band, and it's sort of like, okay, cool. three of the guys in the band sing, and this guy stepped up to the microphone he was just playing rhythm guitar all night. He sang an AC/DC song, and it was just one of those moments you have in your life, you know, where it was sort of like, I remember looking at Cam, the drummer, and just going, that's the guy. Like, who is this? I just need to be in a band with him. Like, he sounds like David Coverdale. What the hell is happening? This doesn't happen in Perth. And, you know, chatting to this guy for 5 minutes, turns out it's the same guy we had sort of poo-pooed about a year earlier. Meet him, just the loveliest guy you've ever met. You know, he's got this, you know, he just looks cool. He's got the voice. He's lovely to chat to. And that's how we met Ryan. And we ended up, long story short, the band that became Ragdolls started as like a 5-piece band. And the bass player left, so Ryan started playing bass. And then we had a singer because we wanted to be, at that stage, we wanted to be Def Leppard. You know, we've got this very specific image of what we want to do. And we had this guy singing, and it didn't really work out. And, you know, anytime Ryan had like sing a part of a song at a show, people would lose their minds. So we ended up just kind of condensing it into a 3-piece band. And not long after that, like I said, we got invited to play this festival in the States, and we just had no idea. We thought, we'll go over and we'll hire a van. We won't even bother hiring gear. We'll just buy some gear, because at the time the dollar was like at parity or something. Gear's cheap in America. We'll buy some stuff. We got put onto somebody who booked us some shows. Well, let's go see what it's like. You know, we're playing a festival, so it's going to be awesome. And I always remember, you know, we went over, and I think the first or second night we were in America, we saw Steel Panther in LA on a Monday night, you know, and there's like 1,000 people there. It's like, oh my God, this is it. We're in the rock capital of the world. And the next morning we flew to Oklahoma City, which is just night and day, you know, and we were staying with, again, this was one of these things where we sort of, I didn't realize it at the time, that it's sort of like building up this network of people who, you know, it may not seem like immediately obvious that knowing someone with a washing machine is a really important thing, but it's such an important thing. And I think the big thing there was it was totally not what we expected. And everybody there, like, Oklahoma is by far the most conservative state in America. I remember being in a Guitar Center and hearing this guy talking about going to see Queen. And I won't repeat what he said, but it was pretty retrograde. You know, it's sort of like, especially in Australia, what we consider, it's pretty dinosaurish to hear. And it's sort of like, man, I remember just sort of looking sideways at this guy and going like, what, where am I? You know, but everybody there is just genuinely lovely and generous. That's the flip side to it. It's sort of like, that really is not something I expected. You know, my initial perception was really wrong there. And you know, people there have it a lot harder than we do in Australia, you know, especially if you don't have much in America, you really don't have much. If you have a lot, you've got a lot. The inequality's kind of breathtaking at times to see. And, but yeah, we just had so many people, you know, we'd play a show and meet somebody and they'd say, hey, if you ever come through next year, you can stay with me. It's like, well, maybe we should take these people up on this offer, because it's costing us an arm and a leg in hotels, and the hotels aren't any good anyway. And, you know, so at the end of that tour, we just made so many friends, really. People from bands, people who came to the shows, and, you know, it was literally the people who would, you know, the sort of people who come to see the support act are always the best kind of people anyway. So, we had that in our favor. And, we sort of just came back with, you know, a real, kind of like a DNA on it, where it's like, man, we got to get back over. We have to go and play more shows, because the 7 or 8 shows we played were, you know, the worst show was better than the best show we'd ever played in Perth. So, so we basically just spent the next year in Perth just, you know, putting every spare penny aside to get back over. And we went over, and we had hooked up with someone who basically was like, hey, I've got 30 dates booked for you guys, and it's going to be awesome, and these are the rooms you're playing in. It's like, fantastic. You know, this really feels like it's going somewhere, and there's momentum behind it. And after about 4 or 5 shows, you know, we had like a string of shows booked, and it's like, cool, we're just waiting on the confirmation for the next one. So it's like we're in America and these shows still aren't confirmed. And the guys every day saying, oh, I'll get it through to you tonight, you know, checks in the mail kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember we went back and we got invited to play this festival again. It was, you know, went over really well, and we sold heaps of merch this time because, you know, we had T-shirts the time we went over before and CDs, and this time we had badges and stickers and beer coolers and condoms and like just everything. And people bought everything as well, which is very different to Australians love to buy stuff. I found when we toured Europe, people were basically only interested in buying vinyl and nothing else. Whereas in America, people just wanted everything. So yeah, I remember we played this show and we hung out all day, and we came back to this little house we were staying at, and we're all sitting there and we're like, what are we going to do? Like, this guy has lied to us. There's no shows, and we've got like 8 weeks left on our plane tickets because we booked to go for 10 weeks. We were sitting there and we said, you know, we can do two things. We can go home, which is fine. Or we can try to like string something together and maybe find a few shows. And that's probably one of the most important things that ever happened to me in my life, because I just got on the phone and I just called. I literally just went through my phone and I called every American number that I had. And I explained the situation to them. I said, look, if you can help us get some shows, we'll play anywhere. We've got a van. We're here for a long time. We'll just do anything. And from that, it just snowballed. We ended up doing 30 shows, and we played, I think, in 10 states. We ended up like playing at the Whiskey in LA, and we played, no, we didn't play the Whiskey. We played at the Roxy in LA. We like picked up a support somewhere. We opened for Bret Michaels in Dallas. We, you know, we played all these really cool shows. We played some absolutely atrocious shows as well, like in the middle of nowhere, like places where we didn't even have phone reception on the floor for $100, you know, just to do something. And it was a life-changing experience for all of us, you know. And on that tour as well, I met my now wife as well, which, you know, again, those tiny little things that end up blossoming and becoming a big thing. And yeah, I think kind of everything I know about how to be persuasive and how to book shows and how to sell your band, you know, like cold calling people and saying, hey, you know, we're in town and I know it's a Tuesday night, but can we come and play a show in your bar? Or can you add us to the bill because our buddies are in this band or something? So, and you know, luckily for us there, people are far more accommodating to that kind of thing. And, yeah. And then from that experience, it's like, we just had enough, I had enough contacts where the next time we went over, we went and did, I think we did like 21 shows in a far shorter period of time, maybe in 26 days or something. I think we did 15 shows in 14 days at one stage. And everything, it was like the opposite of the last tour. It was sort of like, it was so efficient and everything was so well organized, and we came very close to breaking even on it, which is, you know, amazing for us. My goal with music was if it doesn't cost me anything at some stage, that's what I want. And the last time we went, which was 2016, we only went over for a few shows, but we broke even. Like, I was sort of doing the books at the end of it, and I was like, guys, we have actually, it was like $100 either side or something, you know. I can't remember if it was more or less, but it was sort of like, hey, we, you know, spent a week, we played a bunch of shows, we played a festival after the Scorpions, like they did the main stage and we did a side stage, but we played after them, and we had people waiting there until 2 a.m. for us to go on, and played, you know, probably the best show I've ever played in my life. And it was really, really fun. And, you know, kind of, we're not like 10 grand in debt. It's awesome.
I mean, that trip that you went on, where, you know, you're sitting there as a band and you're sort of going, geez, like, you know, we can make a decision here. We can either go home or just just get on the phone and make that decision to try and put us out there and see what we can potentially scrape together. I mean, for you personally, how much of a challenge was that for you? Because I know for myself, it doesn't bother me as much these days, but years gone by, that's such a scary thing to do. To get on the phone and talk to anybody, years and years ago was such a massive challenge for me. But to do that and ask something, and to be in another country as well is just another layer of pressure potentially. But was that a really difficult thing, or was it more sort of because you were just in this environment where there was pressure that it's almost like there's no other choice? Like you don't have time to sort of go through those emotions. You just get the phone out and start flicking through numbers and calling.
Yeah. And honestly, if it was just up to me, I don't think I would have been able to do it. A lot of it was like, it was sort of like, well, I'm here with my two best mates, and I can see how low morale is. Like I can see how much these guys, and feel how much of a bummer it is for everybody. So it's almost like obligation. I always remember there was this one club that we'd played the year before, and I remember a show popping up. Everybody we knew in Dallas was going to go see this show. I think it was Bret Michaels or something. And, obviously Bret Michaels, like I'm not the biggest Poison fan, not my type of 80s rock, but he's obviously like a reality TV star there as well. So it was a big deal. And the Cam, our drummer, he says, hey, you should call the owner of the club and see if they can add us. So I call this guy up, he just looked like your typical cowboy. This guy lived in Fort Worth, and he was pretty staunch, and he's like, nah, sorry, mate. Sorry to hear, but I can't help you. And sort of like, oh yeah, hey, if anything comes up, please call me. And if you change your mind, or to just really, I was laying it on pretty thick. And I hung up, and I was like, oh no, there's no way this guy's going to add us to this show. It'd be really good if he did, but it's just not going to happen. And I think I went to like take a piss or something, and I come back out, and the guys are just grinning, and I'm like, well, what's going on? It's like, oh, your phone rang, and we answered it for you, and it was the owner of the club, and he basically said, he changed his mind in about 5 minutes. He was like, I thought about you guys, and because you're from another country, and I'll stick you on, and ended up being a really awesome gig. It was one of those things where we played to heaps of new people because the club was packed from the get-go. We sold heaps of merch, and a lot of those people, anytime we play over there, they still come to see us. Mm-hmm. So again, those tiny little things. But I guess to answer your question, it just challenged me in ways that I hadn't been challenged previously. And it's almost like one of those things where I didn't want to consider the alternative. Whereas now, I think being a little bit older and a little bit more experienced, it's like I'd actually sort of be able to sit down rationally and go, okay, cool, what's actually the best for us at this stage? But it still is. I think I know I was certainly raised in an environment where it's like, because computers and messaging had become a thing, you don't really call people. So having to actually pick up the phone and call somebody. But I just found, anytime you want something done, it's way easier just to talk to a human being on the other end of the line, rather than people can ignore messages, but it's a bit harder to ignore somebody or be super rude to somebody on the phone. Most people are. Yeah. Most people are, are forgiving enough. But and like I said, I think that just having that experience. There was another Australian band over at the same time, and they were in a similar situation, and they came back and the band broke up. And the next year we were over, there was another Australian band we ran into, and they were doing a similar thing to us, and they came back and the band broke up. And the next year we were over, the same thing happened. And there was another band from Perth who, I know that got booked to go play a festival overseas, and they couldn't do it because a member couldn't do it. And then sort of they changed members, and we always just say it's just amazing that the band hasn't broken up. We're still together. We can still put up with one another, and that's always like the little miraculous thing out of it for me. It's like nearly everybody else that I know who's had a crack at, I guess, indie touring, it's kind of broken the bands up. Whereas I feel like for us, it's the only thing that could have kept us together at the time.
It's one of those things where I think just even that example of that Bret Michaels gig where, most people, and probably not being in the same situation, because I think the situation sort of is the main thing here that influenced all these events to happen. But most bands would not even think to pick up the phone for a last minute gig, and especially an artist like that, and just and think that there's even a remote possibility that maybe there could be possibly an opportunity to play that night. And most bands will go, no, we'll just go and sit around and drink some beers, and that's about it. And just the fact that there must have been an element of pressure there where it's just like anything goes. It's not going to hurt to give it a shot, and let's just ask and roll a dice. And even if it just seems so remote that there's even a possibility of this happening, let's just do it anyway. And I mean, even just listening to you explain it, it's sort of just there's a bunch of light bulbs go off in my head, because I just think of a number of things that I've done over the years where you sort of get into that position where you think, well, why am I stopping myself from taking this next step? Why am I stopping myself from asking or trying something out? What's the worst that can happen? And even if I'm already summing it up in my head thinking, well, there's no point in doing it because it's not going to happen, you think, yeah, but is there even just a little bit of a minute possibility that something could happen from this? And you think, well, if there is, then you should act on it no matter what, because I also build up in my head this level of anxiety that I've tried to convince myself that it's a healthy thing, but I get myself so worked up that there is just no other possibility. If I don't do this, then I will allow it to eat at me to the extent that I get I get to a level of anxiety that's almost uncontrollable. So I push myself into a corner where it's easier and safer for me just to take the plunge and ask or inquire or reach out to somebody and see if there's a possibility of something happening. And it doesn't always work, but there have been examples where it has worked, and I've just sat back after the fact when it's all happened and thought, wow, like, did that just happen? Like, that was a lot easier than I thought it was, and I almost didn't do it. And it's just so cool when more of these examples pop up from other people that have gone through these periods of time and these situations where it's just like, stuff it, like, let's just give it a shot, let's see what happens. And these great moments come from it.
Yeah, and as I said, I totally understand. I think I'm very similar. It's something I've really tried to moderate with myself, where it's like, it's that sort of catastrophizing thing you push yourself into, where it's like, okay, if I don't do this, then I'm really going to regret it. So I just have to do it. What's the worst that could happen? And when the reality is, it's like call somebody or send an email, the interesting thing from that is that I guess the main thing that I learned was, especially like, I think Perth's a really interesting case study in like the culture around music, where I think the culture around music is bad, like in a lot of ways, both from the way people approach like going to see bands, but also among bands themselves, where it's like no one in bands, and this was actually a friend of mine said this recently. It's sort of like there's sort of like these two distinct worlds in Perth, where it's like there's a cover band scene and there's the original band scene, like a lot of places. But everyone who plays covers, they're all kind of buddies. Like everyone knows one another. People fill in here and there. It's sort of like there's a little bit of camaraderie there and a lot of crossover. And with the original scene, it's like completely. Most people are totally cut up from one another, and not a lot of people are friends. And there's like a lot of rivalry, and because it's a small scene, obviously there's limited opportunities, and a lot of I find what you see is that you get these bands who it seems like, why are they getting all the gigs? Why are they getting all the favors? And a lot of the time it's just because they're the only people picking up the phone, or sending an email. Because I didn't know how that worked when I started out. It's like I always remember a friend's band, they opened for Paul Stanley years ago. I wasn't even playing in bands, so it's like, how does that even happen? I don't even know how to approach that. And now if I see there's a band coming to town, the first thing I think about is, who's the promoter? and what's their email address, and I'm just going to send an email, and because if that's a band I'd love to play with and open for, and if it'll be good for us, well, there's absolutely no reason not to have that little thing in the back of their head, because at some point they might think, oh, we need a local support. Who are we going to do? Oh, I know Ragdolls in town, so, maybe let's ask them to do it or something. So,
I think there's a couple of things there with like that dynamic between cover bands and original bands. And I mean, I could just be throwing a few things out in the dark here just to try and, work out the psychology behind it all. But I think when it comes to original music, people put their hearts on their sleeve in a really bad way, where they're so raw because and maybe this is a bit of that tall poppy stuff. I don't know, but it's sort of, you're being open creatively, you're putting out your own stuff, and it's there to be judged. And I think a lot of musicians are the autopilot is to be defensive straight away. So everybody that comes into contact that isn't part of the inner circle of your band, or a fan or a friend of the band, is competition. It's competition to steal attention, steal the crowd, steal the opportunities, whatever it might be. And I guess the cover circuit, and I'm not terribly familiar with the cover circuit, but I do have a lot of friends that have played in cover bands over the years. But I guess the perception potentially is that there's a different type of pressure in the cover circuit, where it's not so much about the individual in the band, it's more about the opportunities of playing the circuit and playing, the regular venues where you can, put on either your tribute show or your cover set or whatever it might be. But it's not that personal aspect that is raw, where you're being exposed as an individual and you're putting everything on the line, your money, your relationships, everything out there. And there's still competition, but it's a different element. And I think the problem with all that, and it's completely understandable, but the problem that festers off it, and I've fairly or unfairly, I've slagged the metal scene big time over the years, and I've got a lot of friends that don't probably not as close to me as they were in the past, because I've been really hard on a lot of metalheads, because I don't think a lot of metal fans or metal musicians have done themselves a lot of favors over the years, because we've sort of sat in this feeling of being the victim, and we're quick to whinge about being, the outcast, rebelling against society, everybody hating us, not getting any opportunities, being ignored, and we've taken almost a sense of pride in that, which is great fuel and great energy. But at the same time, there's no proactive approach that comes out of that, where you go and seek opportunities, because it sort of almost wrecks that identity that comes with being a metalhead and going against the grain. And so metalheads are the first ones to complain. They're the first ones to shit on anybody else that's doing great things. Anybody that's not quite 100% heavy metal is shat on. But it all comes from jealousy and the fact that they're not doing it themselves. And so then you turn around and say, but you've got talent and your band's really good. And if you guys actually just did the basics and put your arm out and tried to look for opportunities, or even help your peers and your friends that are doing similar stuff, then maybe everybody would be better off. But it's and I know it's not just metal, it's a lot of musicians in general, but I mean, certainly from my experiences, I've seen that. And so it's this element of this rawness and this personal aspect of their individuality, sort of, in their creativity, mixed with, at least in the metal world, this, not conforming to the norm and being against the grain and being the black sheep and really sort of taking pride in it. But it actually becomes this thing that is just weighing you down.
Yeah, it's a myth, that to me, though. It's because the reality is, if you grow up in Australia, like, you're probably like lower to upper middle class. And this isn't to like discount the fact that, there are huge issues in like Australian society around like domestic violence, and mental health is another one. But looking at it from that perspective of being a victim is just not accurate. Even looking at like the difference between here and the United States, like wealth inequality in America is like, it's actually a crippling thing. Like if you're not wealthy, it's almost impossible to bust out of that cycle of like, a lot of my friends there live in poverty. Where I remember speaking to somebody the second year we went over, they're playing an amazing band, and the band has quite a fervent audience, and they obviously don't do it all the year round. They do it for kind of whenever they can, and they do little tours here and there. But when they're not doing it, one of the guys plays covers, and I said to him, I was like, oh, just out of curiosity, like, how much money do you guys make out of doing a gig? And he was like, oh, maybe like, for a 3-piece band, $100 each would be a good night. And I remember just kind of saying, oh, okay, cool. And sort of thinking that I remembered that year we'd done a mine site show where we'd made like over $1,000 each. And we put all that money towards the band, but it was literally, we played 2 sets of music. We just played a bunch of AC/DC and Barnsley, and that was, it was such, especially in WA, because there's so many of those kind of mining gigs. It really put a lot of that into perspective. It's like, I will never complain about doing a gig after that. These guys play a lot longer and for a lot less. And but back to that same kind of point, it's like, rather than think of yourself as like, the victim, it's like, well, there's a lot of ways you can promote your band indirectly, and there's a huge audience for metal music. It's not necessarily in Australia, but you can access a lot of people by making content around your stuff and doing a lot of it yourself. And if you can't do it yourself, don't be afraid to ask somebody else. And I always think the most, especially with a lot of metal bands that I like, a lot of the bands that I like and the content that they make is very unmetal, say, for, it's a strange term, but it might be like a very cinematic style music video. I think of like a band like, say, like Evergrey, or someone who I remember hearing years ago and falling in love with, and they're like, there's a lot of other bands who do what they do, that kind of symphonic, proggy, dark kind of metal stuff, but you watch their music videos, and their music videos are gorgeous. They're like cinematic, and you crank the sound up and things like that, and it really sort of takes you somewhere else. Or the exact opposite end of the spectrum, look at King Parrot. I think are a great example of a band that, like, most people, if you just played it to them and said, here's a grindcore band, not everybody loves grindcore, but the way that they have used their, like, sort of Australianness to market their band is amazing. Really, really amazing. It's got that kind of gore horror thing to it. But, it's such a unique thing for a grindcore band to do what they do. Or 12 Foot Ninja are another great example. I remember we were in the States, and we were doing like a side stage, and they were doing one of the bigger side stages, and like everybody there was like, we cannot wait to see this band because their music videos are so funny. And then they do a lot of that stuff live, and it's like, man, I remember when those guys were playing like the Prince of Wales in Bunbury to like 50 people. And that was not very long ago, and now they're like legitimately killing it. And that it's because they've, I guess, kind of like maybe stepped outside, they're just thinking outside of the box a little bit more, and they realize that people watch YouTube to watch funny stuff, and it's just part of their product. And I think it's kind of like a cultural thing. If you can build a good culture around your band or a group of bands. Somebody who, as you were saying that, I immediately thought of was Stu McGill, who does Stormrider Festival and Stormrider Touring and Silent Night. And man, I just, A, the loveliest guy you'll ever meet. B, very, very savvy businessman. And C, really, I don't know if he realizes what he's doing, but he's actually trying to change the culture around like the local metal scene. And even like the Claim the Throne guys as well, they have their podcasts about basically how to do stuff if you're in a band. And it's awesome. It's like we're actually just sharing some of our experience with everybody else. help the community rather than like keeping all this stuff that we know works really close to our chest so that no one else can know it. So that, yeah, it's, you know what I mean?
That's one thing that I've noticed quite a bit doing this podcast, and, you know, Stu's very similar to, I see a lot of things that we both share as far as being in bands that probably haven't been the most popular of genres in Australia. And, you know, you mentioned it really early in the conversation about, you know, power metal bands in Australia, and there's like, you know, you can't even count them on one hand, barely. And
yeah.
And for us, I mean, we've always been, you know, that band that sort of sticks out, and, you know, for good or bad. And, you know, I guess not taking ourselves seriously has helped along the way, because we've had that self-deprecating humor where we take the piss out of ourselves. But through that, we've been able to win over a lot of people that would never be seen dead at a power metal gig, or would never be seen dead or admit that they even listened to, you know, anything slightly melodic, and their whole world, death metal, black metal, you know, extreme metal, whatever it might be, because that's their identity. But you start to win some of these people over because you're talking to them on the same level, and there's no judgment. And you sort of, the big thing with, and I always talk to a lot of other friends of mine that, you know, play in metal bands or are immersed in the Australian sort of metal culture, and we're always yelling out and saying how people don't treat us fairly for whatever reason, opportunities, you know, exposure or whatever it might be, but we're not practicing what we preach. And so what I always say, and Stu's a really good example, and I'm glad you mentioned him because he needs a lot more credit. He does not put any judgment for anybody else whatsoever. He always extends himself out there. He's always willing to talk to everybody. He won't go out of his way to bullshit anybody and say whether he likes a particular style of music or not, but he doesn't even need to mention that. And his character and the way that he interacts with people just brings all these different worlds together. And I've certainly seen it. I mean, you know, over the years of coming to Perth, and just the way that the crowds interact with each other and the different bands, I mean, I'm sure it's still got its challenges like any city, but it seems to be a lot more close knit. And the Claim the Throne guys, the same sort of deal, where they are bringing more information to light and being able to expose people to a little bit more behind the scenes, because that's one thing with the podcast that I've found, and it's manifested over time, is that you start to get people that listen to the podcast that are just a reflection of myself. And when I think about myself, and this sort of goes full circle to what we were talking about earlier with your YouTube channel, and sort of really sort of connecting with the younger self, you know, that 15-year-old, that teenager who's just trying to work out what music is, what's metal, what's all these great things, and having that wonder and that amazement, but also that real feeling of insecurity and self-esteem issues where you just don't know where you fit into the world. And for me, like, this podcast has been so good because I've got a lot of mates that would never admit it, but would stand there with their arms crossed and not get into a D&M, or, you know, have any type of conversation with substance. But through this podcast and other podcasts out there, they've been able to understand and be more open-minded to different people and different perspectives and different ideas, and also understand that even though they don't like the same freaking band that you like, people have the same challenges, the same loves, the same passions, and there's a lot of things that we connect over. And that's been this really cool sort of side effect of this podcast, is that I know that there's people out there that were me when I was 15 that are just too scared to talk to other people and learn that, you know, that we all share common traits and common challenges and things like that. And it's extended more than music, but it's just been this really, really cool thing where some of this stuff, I think I love to shit on metalheads way too much. I get on a bit of a roll when I do it, but
oh man, I'm the same. It's like your family, right?
Yeah,
you know, you're always
that's it.
A bit more critical of the things you're close to.
Too close to home, and it's just it lights a fire. But I certainly see a lot of people starting to change, and I think maybe it's just the era that we live in. We're more exposed to different ideas and concepts, and we can see different people's opinions, and there's more of a free exchange of ideas, and the content out there is never ending. And so I think people just in society in general are less ignorant and closed-minded, and I think people are more compassionate and open-minded about everything. But I'm starting to see it happen in metal, where people are a little bit more encouraging of each other and wanting people and friends to succeed, or even people that they don't know but just have got the mutual connection of being an artist in Australia and seeing people succeed and actually congratulating people instead of bitching about them behind their back or saying, well, they must have got a free ride, or they didn't deserve it, we deserved it, and all that sort of rubbish. And that's still there, but I don't see it as much as what I have in the past. So it's you doing your channel and bringing your personality and what you love out there and sharing information and teaching people and bringing people together, and me doing my podcast as well. It's sort of this really cool thing that's happening, and it's happening in a lot of different places where people are just I don't know, just breaking down the barrier a little bit more and being more open-minded to have better conversations and better dialogue.
Yeah, I think a big thing as well, one thing that's nice about even something like podcasting, because of the format, because it's long form and because it's engaging people, I think what social media has done, and there's been this, like, especially in Australia, there's like, with issues around mental health, and especially, issues around, especially if you're like, especially with men, right? This idea of like being open. And for our generation, I feel, like straight men are way more open than we would have been, a generation or two ago. And it seemed like there was a lot of focus on, we just need to get people to open up and maybe talk about their feelings and things like that. And as that's happened, the sort of like, we're also living through this generation where things like suicide the rates are actually going up. As sort of, I'm out of my league at the moment quoting statistics or things like this, but the rate of these kind of things is increasing, even though supposedly there's more openness and things like that. I think what social media has actually done is it may have made people a little bit more open, but it's not in the right way. Whereas like a long form thing, like a podcast, for example, offers nuance and offers depth, and I think people really need stuff to do. So it's one of those things where it's like, if you can go to a metal show and you can engage with it in like the wrong way, which is to stand at the back with your arms crossed and like judge all the bands, or you can go to a metal show in the right way and you can like interact with people there and you can chat to them, and you might go and see all the bands even though you might not like them. You kind of challenge yourself a little bit where you have to maybe work a little bit harder to find something that you like, and that seems to be really good for people's well-being in general. I've definitely found that with myself, rather than just going to a show and totally ignoring something. It's like, well, I may not like it, but I'm actually going to try to find something that I do, and that's going to totally change my outlook, and it's going to make me feel better. And it's just going to be better for me in the long run, listening to a pod, if anybody's listening to this and they're getting exposed to some new ideas, as you said, maybe it's just, rather than seeing like a tweet or a Facebook post, or, if you spend enough time on YouTube, the thing that the YouTube algorithm leans you to, it might be, conspiracy theories or all these kind of things where it's sort of like, okay, cool, maybe that's not the right way to do it, and maybe it's being dishonest about the way it's presenting information. It's more about like, as you said, it's like, it's not just about having a chat, it's actually about those deep and meaningful conversations which can make you kind of like change your outlook, change the things that you do. I think that's definitely what I go for anyway with my channel. It's like, I want to present information, but I actually want to help people do stuff. And, if it helps them do it better or do it in a more enjoyable way, or helps them enjoy playing guitar again, even better, because I think it's really important to be engaged with those things at that level.
I think it's a really sort of, it's not the right word, but it's a soft approach in the way that, going back to what you said about guys stereotypically having challenges with having any sort of conversation of substance, that's sort of linked to any form of emotion. And when there's problems, especially, it's something that's it's trying to get blood out of a stone. And I think, a lot of these different formats that are a little bit more long form and engaging, it's not putting pressure on the listener to have to engage into the conversation, or have to make comment, or have to talk about themselves, or be put on the spot. They're able to sit back and listen. And I mean, this was a big influence to me to actually start the podcast. Was I was listening to these great long-winded conversations with people, and I would just lose track of time, because I'd look at it and I download it and it's like, oh, you know, an hour, 2 hours, some of them 3 plus. And I'm like, I've got other things to do. I don't have time to listen to a podcast that long. And then I would just listen. And then before I knew it, I started doing a few other things in the background, and I'm just tinkering away, doing some stuff. And I'm listening, and I'm finding myself feeling like I'm part of that conversation, even though I'm not actually actively participating. And suddenly, like, my shields were coming down, where I started to be a little bit more open-minded, where it was just really sort of the safe sort of scenario where I could listen and sort of almost express myself by having this connection with the people that were having a discussion, going, oh, I agree with that. And, oh, I feel the same way as that. And so for me, it was sort of this influence where it sort of started to inspire me to think, I love this feeling. I love being able to be candidly involved in a conversation, or even like YouTube content where it's like really sort of valuable information, where you're learning and getting engaged with the person that's presenting the information, where you think, I want to be a part of that more, and I want to see what I can do. And now, after listening to other people and understanding that there's more people out there that share similar opinions or similar outlooks or similar passions or similar challenges, that maybe I've got something to say, or maybe I can use this format to actually actively get out there and start asking questions for other people and learn from their stories, and go on this little mini quest of my own to try and work out where I fit into the world and where everybody else fits into the world. And it's just been this really cool journey. But it's that format of, you know, I think the instantaneous accelerated pace of social media has influenced a lot of mental health issues, where, and, you know, I'm sure like this topic gets churned out over and over again, but it's, you know, people tend to use platforms to articulate a particular aspect of their lives. And so we get pressured indirectly or subconsciously that people are either leading amazing lives, or people are constantly just whinging and just hating life and hating everybody. And it's there's nothing really balanced in between. It's either one or the other. So if you're one of the sad sacks like me, and I'm trying to break this habit, but I suck at it, but I wake up in the morning, and before I've even crawled out of bed, I'm scrolling through my phone, checking emails, checking everything. And
me too.
And it's such a bad thing to do, because that can really set my day up for disaster, because all I need to do is look at a bunch of posts that are either from people that are doing the most incredible things in the world, and it sort of highlights what I'm not doing, and I don't feed off that energy in a positive way, or I'm just looking at a bunch of negativity, which is then setting the tone for the day as well. And so I can completely understand why a lot of people struggle, and why a lot of mental health issues have sort of come more so to the forefront. And, you know, suicide's been this big challenge that everybody's dealing with at the moment, because it's just it's full on. It's really, really full on to digest that information and try and manage it. And a lot of the time we're not even conscious to it. We're just walking through each day throughout the week with this underlying tension and stress that we don't even know why it's there or what it is. And most of the time it's because we've been flicking through our phone, watching what everybody else is doing, and forgetting where we are. And it's crazy. But I mean, you know, to put that positive spin on it, that's why these things are so important. And people that are taking that extra step to put more substance and more value, and finding ways to get a message out there, and not just about talking about what we love and what we enjoy doing, but it's like, well, I do love doing these things, but I want to do this in a way that I'm connecting with other people, and I can pass on that energy and that passion to somebody else, because I want somebody else to feel that same way or get the same value that I did, you know, whether it be, you know, as a teenager or what I've been learning now. And it's really exciting.
I think there's sort of like, I don't know if it's not exactly an original idea, but it seems like we just lived through this huge like schism with the internet and then social media, where it's like we've forgotten what like community actually is. I was talking about this with a friend of mine the other day, where we were talking about, I guess for me, it's probably like, by the time I was old enough to go and see live music, there was no, like maybe Instagram, like maybe YouTube had just come out, you know? But it was kind of like you get on like MSN Messenger or something and you send your mates a thing. It's like, who's going to the show? Cool. We'll all go and we'll all catch up. Where it's like now, you know, it's like with Instagram and Facebook, you know, there's like everybody's got their platform of choice and they are always filtering their experience in the most favorable light to like construct this narrative, to tell, not just to tell themselves, right? Because I think like, you know, as people, like we're kind of like narrating our own lives, you know? Funnily enough, I was listening to a podcast the other day where I was talking about in people who have had the two sides of their brain severed, that they could feed information into the like narrating side of it and make somebody do it, and then they would say, why did you do that? And then they will come up with a reason later on, like, oh no, I did that because something funny happened, or that kind of thing, where it's like, yeah, we're always like post hoc adding this like narrative to what we've done. Yeah. But social media kind of like totally brings out the most manipulative, worst elements of that, where it's like, not only can we represent that to ourselves so that when we go back and look through like our Instagram feed, we remember things differently, we're actually signaling to everybody else. So it's like, look how fantastic my life is. When, you know, in reality, it's like most people probably, you know, going through the same ups and downs as everybody else. But because we're signaling that everything's great, it's like, that's a really bad thing to do for your mental health. Like, you know, you know, it's the classic, hey, you look upset. Are you okay? It's like, no, I'm great. While you're secretly dying on the inside kind of thing. And people go, oh, but they seem like such a happy person. When I saw their Instagram story, yeah. I mean, it's a constant source of inspiration for song lyrics, I find, the way these parts of human nature are like manifesting themselves through these tools we use now.
That's why music's so powerful, isn't it? I mean, that's why, you know, going back to sort of that emotive element of music and people having it as a soundtrack that, you know, is surrounded by defining moments in life, or you know, people searching for answers or searching for connectivity, or for a way to find some common ground and search for somebody that's going through the same struggles. And then you just listen to a line from a song and you just go, oh, it got me. And that's why people so easily connect with music and are so passionate about it. And it's a really powerful thing. But one thing that, and I'm going to keep it on the time, and I really want to pick your brain about this math and science stuff, but I'll have to come back to you another stage. But just going on the social media stuff, and one person, and he'll probably cringe because I'm going to mention his name, but one person who just has totally embraced social media so well, in my opinion anyway, is Lachlan White from the Racket, Triple J. And he's working for EVP Recordings these days as well. And he's been on the podcast in the past, and a really, really good guy. But that guy, the way he uses social media is totally unashamed. And to me is just, there's an element of recklessness, the way that he manages and approaches his Instagram, his Facebook, his Twitter, and he uses it all in different ways. But he will just put himself out there in such a raw state. If he's pumped, if he's happy, he puts it out there. If he is miserable, if he's depressed, if he's going through a really rough patch, you know, he'll put that out there. There's no hesitation. It's raw. Sometimes it's ugly, and it's just him. And I don't know whether he, you know, has any sort of particular intention with the way that he approaches it, or that's just an extension of himself. But it's an example of somebody that just, at least from my perspective anyway, doesn't hold back and is just using it in a way that is just, I'm just putting it out there. And if people like it, they like it. And if people can get something out of it, that's great. If they don't, whatever, I don't care. And it's just really interesting to watch somebody do that, because I know so many other people out there that are really fabricating the perception to ensure that
Yeah.
people see them in a particular light. And when I see people like Lachlan do it, I just think, you know what, that's, you know, whether there's a method to the madness behind it or not, it's from somebody that is observing. It's so valuable to see people do that, because it shows that we're all exactly the same. We all have our ups and our downs. We go through these patches where we're bouncing off the walls, and the next minute we're barely, you know, picking our head up off the ground. And it's just, and I think that's the beauty of being a human, and keeping ourselves steady and keeping ourselves moving, is that, you know, we should be allowed to express ourselves that way and not feel ashamed, or feel like we're not allowed to express ourselves in that manner. So it is a very hard thing for people to do, but when it is done, and when you see people doing it, it's just it's really cool. It's reassuring.
Yeah, yeah. I think because the internet really feeds like a mob mentality as well. It's sort of like there's a way in that that kind of, I wouldn't say like, maybe honesty isn't the right word, but like the fact that you're just putting a diverse range of stuff up there, right? That you're actually showing, you know, I think so much of like, and I think it has to do with marketing, because marketing is like omnipresent in like everything we do. And like something like Instagram, it's like, yeah, you're telling this story and you're really trying to sell it. Or same thing as like a lot of YouTube or podcasting and things like that, whatever the medium is. And it really lacks like the type of, like it lacks like a diversity in a way, you know, where it's like everything is like saccharine. And it's like, oh yes, this thing happened and it made me really happy. And it's like this search for happiness. And I always remember, I rewatched this movie recently, and I remember watching it as a teenager and just being like, whoa, dude, this is the best thing I've ever seen. And it didn't age as well as I expected. But I always remember, if you've seen the movie Donnie Darko,
Yeah.
which is like a cult film, when I was a teenager, everyone was like, bro, it's so trippy. You know, they have a character come in and say, you know, think about how you felt and put it on the line between fear and love. And, you know, Jake Gyllenhaal's character, Donnie, he's like, you can't condense all of human emotion into these like two binaries. There's so much more to life than just fear and love. And that he's just like, put the dot on the line, like, you know, just do what you're told. And I feel like there's that polarizing element with a lot of social media, where it's like, human beings are so complex, you know, we share so many things in common, but there's such a complexity and such a diversity to like the human experience, that trying to like just focus on, say, happiness, or just focus on like injustice in the world, it's like it denies the like breadth of the human experience. Trying to be happy all the time it's a fool's errand, because, you know, we're like biological machines with like fluctuating chemical levels in us that, you know, make us feel different ways, different times of the day. You know, you and I are pretty lucky because we're dudes, you know, it's like women have it a lot harder, where it's like you actually have this biological mechanism that's so like deeply rooted that like changes your body and your thoughts and your emotions like month by month. That to deny all of that, it's really, it is quite myopic, I think. And seeing people put it out there, it's like, yeah, hey, you know what? I'm having a shit day. You know, I'm just throwing it out there. I'm sure there's some other people out there who are going through the same thing. So maybe don't feel as isolated, or don't feel that it's super catastrophic, you know, because it's happening to lots of us. It's easy to forget.
It's, and it's that balance again of, you know, what we were talking about earlier about, you know, that tall poppy syndrome. And I think, you know, at least here in Australia, we take great pride in being that sort of level-headed, down-to-earth, rational sort of, you know, blokey mentality, where, you know, we always downplay everything, and so any sort of heightened state of emotion, whether it be positive or negative, is sort of frowned upon a little bit. So, and it's difficult, because you've got to sort of navigate that. And I think there are advantages of us, our culture, and the way that I think many of us have been brought up, but there are a lot of disadvantages, and people are very, very reluctant to express themselves in whichever extreme because they're worried about what that response is going to be in that judgment. And so when people, will put themselves out there and say that they're having a shit day for whatever reason, then you will be guaranteed that you'll get a few responses saying, suck it up. What you've got nothing to worry about. Life's great. What do you mean? In the context of a musician, you get to play music. You're good at guitar. Like what have you got to complain about? And then it becomes a competition where it's like, you think that you've got a bad life. Well, you should see what I'm doing, and I can't do this and I can't do that. And then it's like,
oh man.
And
there's a Monty Python sketch like that where they're talking about growing up. You were lucky. When I grew up, I'd eat a handful of gravel, work 25 hours a day. It's just like, it's so, I always think of that when I see things like that. But yeah,
it's just this,
again, it lacks nuance and balance,
It does. And it's this constant, well, I think we contradict ourselves as well. And even as I'm trying to articulate this, I'm realizing that, I think it's just a human condition where we're constantly contradicting ourselves because we're trying to find a set of circumstances that benefit us personally. And so while we're quick to cut somebody else down or bring them back to earth or whatever, we'll be the first ones to get out there and yell, cry wolf or say how bad life is or beat them at their level of suffering or whatever it might be. And so, or the other way around, where somebody is celebrating something fantastic and then somebody is quick to throw in just a little bit of a backhanded compliment and say, but have you done this? Or yeah, I remember doing that years ago. It's sort of like,
I remember my first beer.
Yeah, and it's just that thing where we just can't help ourselves sometimes, and we're a walking contradiction, and that's just part of being a human. But it is a very difficult thing to navigate if you don't have that awareness yourself to try and manage that and understand when it does come in and you're in contact with it, how to effectively manage it, because a lot of people get swept up in it and really come out worse for wear.
Yeah, it's like, man, what was I going to say? Far out, lost my train of thought. That's no good. That's what I was going to say. We're all hypocrites, and that's actually what makes us interesting. And that kind of like people's blind spots almost kind of like define them. Yeah. Everybody kind of goes, it's like, Jono, like, yeah, he's such a relaxed bloke, but he gets so fired up when the Eagles play, and it's really funny to see him flip out about that. Or, so-and-so who's always super positive or something like this. Anytime they, go to like, they never want to show me like the songs that they're writing, or somebody who's, they work in mental health, but, their room's a mess. And, like those contradictions, as you said, are what actually make us interesting. They're all the things that you love about somebody as well. It's kind of like, it's kind of funny that they're so balanced when it comes to this, but then they're so nuts about something else,
That's it. And that sort of just, really sort of highlights the fact that, yes, we're all hypocrites, but it's also that lack of perfectionism that we all feel that we have to strive for, but none of us actually have. And it comes back to, how we're portrayed in the marketing, self-branding, all that sort of stuff, and putting ourselves out there with an intention of a particular type of perception that we want people to view ourselves as. But really, I mean, we're all a mess in our own rights, and we're all just trying to do the best that we can with what we've got. And there's a real positivity around that I think once people sort of have that light bulb moment, they understand that it's completely fine to be a walking contradiction, be a hypocrite, have a number of things that sort of are in constant conflict. That's completely fine, and if anything, is celebrated, because that's what makes us unique.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the more that you realize, the more that you kind of moderate the extremes between that. Sort of like the classic example to me is like, in the United States, how many staunchly conservative politicians have like come out as being, like anti-abortion, anti-gay marriage. It's come out that they're gay. That it's actually this like extreme reaction to their own circumstances. So, just realizing that like, actually, no, I am a hypocrite, and I'm probably wrong about a lot of stuff that I complain about. So that way I'm not going to become too extreme in any one way, is always, I guess that's the way, like, I always try to conceive it. You know, like I said earlier, it's like I spend so much time making videos about guitar gear. And I own a lot of guitars and I own a lot of guitar gear, but it's like 95% of the time I play one guitar through the one thing that I use most of the time. And that makes me really, like, content. Then having to offer advice to people when they're like, oh, what should I do? You know, I see you've got all this stuff. It's like, you know, you can probably be happy with 2 or 3 guitars and an amp and a few pedals, but then again, that's easy for me to say because I've got so much stuff, you know? So yeah, it's very, very interesting in that regard.
Well, we'll have to come back and do a round 2 because there's a whole bunch of stuff I've written here that I haven't even touched yet. But I had a feeling we're going to go off on a tangent straight away, and we just ran with it. It was really, really good.
Yeah,
I'm glad.
That was great, man.
Yeah, and I'm really glad we've been able to catch up and have a chat. I was going to ask you before we wrap it up, from Ragdolls' perspective, what's 2019 look like for the band?
Hopefully we will finish the album that we started in 2018. Yeah, I think basically, long story short, at the end of 2017, our singer Ryan, his eldest son, got really sick, and that kind of hit us all for 6. And I think it just made us made me reevaluate a lot of things, and kind of made us realize that, yeah, you know, we've been doing this for a while now, and we've been chucking a lot of resources at it, and it's actually been really good to us. You know, we've achieved a lot of the goals we initially set out and a whole lot more. And for us now, it's the focus is really just on enjoying the process more. So, and it's been great. You know, we've probably tracked half the album at the moment, and doing it in little bits and going in and, you know, trying to track some stuff live and just explore, you know, other avenues of being creative. So hopefully that will be what we get finished in 2019. And then on the back of that, obviously, hopefully kick into another touring cycle where I'd really love to go back to the States. We've had a bit of demand there and some offers there, and same thing in Europe as well. We toured Europe in 2016, and that's a whole other animal. It's a really, you know, you really get treated like a professional there. So, you get paid well and all these kind of things. So that's something that I think going forward, you know, we'd really like to sort of get to the stage where, you know, like I said, if we can keep doing it and keep breaking even and, you know, one day make a bit of money out of doing it like that, even if we tour for 2 weeks out of a year, you know, that's, it's, for me, it's not this thing where it's like, I don't have this like chip on my shoulder anymore, like maybe I did when I was younger, where it's like, I need to achieve all these things and prove to everybody else that what I do is worthwhile and valid. It's more of, you know, an internal thing where there's so many songs left to write, so many riffs left to come up with, and just kind of exploring that. And yeah, that's kind of the main focus for Ragdoll going forward, and making a bunch of content around it as well. You know, I love music videos and collaborating with people on those, and obviously now that I'm doing the YouTube thing, doing a bunch of I'd like to hopefully do at least a playthrough video for every song, and, you know, break down every song for people who want to learn them. And I've kind of been doing that with our back catalog. A few people asked me like, oh, can you show us how to play some of the riffs and solos on there? And the response I got to them was pretty good. So kind of doing that, and, you know, just I guess making it more of like a multimedia experience rather than just dropping an album out on Spotify into the, you know, just like everybody else. There's so much music coming out. It's more a case of, okay, it'd be great to put out an album that people can, you know, kick back and party to or chill out to, sort of whatever they want to do. And, you know, they can listen to the lyrics and hopefully go on a bit of a journey and explore some of the ideas there. But also, if they want to learn how to play it on guitar, or if they're somebody who's getting into, you know, who wants to be a mix engineer, you know, putting up a version with all the stems. So if people want to remix the album or listen to individual parts, or like kind of a lot of that whole thing I see a lot of other bands doing, because there's less demand for physical product, but there's way more demand for the multimedia thing. So doing a lot of that, and then obviously the YouTube thing just kind of keeps plowing along. That's always really fun, and there's lots of ideas. Yeah, it seems like every week I'll see a video or get inspired, something like that. And I think probably with a slant towards a little bit more of the educational stuff, like playing and breaking down some of those things, because there seems to be, some slight holes that I see somewhere on YouTube where it's like people explaining a concept, or, there's some amazing music theory channels out there. But I don't see anybody who's like a heavy metal guitar player doing it. So maybe there's a bit of stuff there for me to explore. So yeah.
Oh man, I could talk to you for so long just on that last little spiel of plans for even around Ragdoll and multi-purpose content and different platforms and different ways to sort of get new music out there. I mean, we're on the verge of embarking on that whole journey again with us, and we're just finalizing the album. That's been a long time coming. Video clips about to come out soon as well, and
that's awesome.
And our dynamic is very similar to you guys in the sense that life sort of just changes with multiple people in the band, and the dynamic changes. I've noticed I've said dynamic quite a bit. That's my new buzzword. I've noticed that. But anyway, I digress. That dynamic in the band has changed so much, where the priorities have shifted, where we're not, either we don't want to or we can't physically tour as much as we used to. So you have to sort of think about that. I don't like using
impact. I think is the word.
It's the impact, but it's also that evergreen content, and I hate saying, I cringe a little bit when I use that term because it gets thrown around so much, but you want to be able to create multi-purpose content around the music. And so having playthroughs, having educational stuff around it, having behind the scenes or the context or the story behind the songs, and the lyric videos sort of got sort of overdone for a little while there, but people have put a new spin on them now, and they seem to be more impressive than ever before. But even on Spotify now, there's and I need to look into it a bit more, but there's an accompanied app that syncs into Spotify where you can create did you know sort of content around songs. And I've noticed that with a lot of bigger artists that have got this, and I just think that's genius, where a song pops up and it's like, did you know that this song was recorded, or this happened on this around this song? And I just think there's a lot of stuff around storylines where people can identify, and I think now you nailed on the head. People don't digest music like they used to. There's so much noise out there. The volume of new music that constantly comes out every day is overwhelming, and so you need to have these additional things that are a point of difference that separate and cut through that noise. And the biggest thing, and I've seen it through a lot of stuff that I've been working on over the last few years around content, and you mentioned it before, community and stuff like that, you have to identify and you have to connect with people. And there's so many ways that people digest information these days: visual, audio, physical, tangible stuff in person, the CD, the vinyl, the digital download, whatever it might be. There's so many different things, and you have to cover as much as you can. And for us, when we're not touring anymore, or as much as we used to, you have to sort of have stuff up there that can create multiple and numerous opportunities for people to discover who you are, and then hopefully turn that into some sort of monetary stream where you're constantly having trickles of dollars come in over time, where you don't have the pressure to be out on the road all the time and selling t-shirts and getting money off the door and guarantees and all that sort of stuff, where you can still maintain other aspects of life which you should be maintaining, such as relationships and family, and other people have got
100%
other careers and all that, but not give up the passion of music. And I've seen so many friends just throw in the towel and no longer play anymore because it was so one-dimensional, where it was like, I can't tour anymore, I can't do this anymore, so it's either that or nothing. And now it's not that case anymore, and you can live these, you can wear the multiple hats and still do it, and be able to be the artist and be the creative and be the musician and not compromise anything in life. And I barely came up for air then, but that's something that is just
oh man, you put it so well. I agree.
It's a big
and
thing.
the reality is, you know, you're better off. I always feel like you're better off playing one good gig, you know, here and there, than like 10 totally crappy, demoralizing ones. So as long as you have those kind of good, those really good, you know, for me, it's always, the bottom line is like, you know, as long as I'm playing in some format, I love playing live music and I love playing live. It's one good show will sustain me for a whole year, you know? And yeah, as you said, it's you know, it's a new world. And I don't think anybody has fully mastered it yet, which is kind of cool, because it means it's, you know, I think the danger around all of that and all those platforms is that you don't want it to feel like a chore either. That's kind of the big thing I've been focusing on, is it's like, I actually want to enjoy this process of making content and making music. And, you know, if it takes a little bit longer, or, you know, people have family commitments, or they're going on holiday, you know, it's not the end of the world. You just kind of pick it up where you left off in a month or 2 months or something, and keep going.
There's no pressure, there's no rush, and there's no rules either. There's no rule book anymore. I mean, you know, 10, 15, 20 years ago plus, you know, there was an unwritten rule book as far as how to function as a musician in a band setting or whatever it might be, because the opportunities were so limited and few that there was only a particular way of approaching those situations to get any form of whatever your interpretation of success was. But now the possibilities are endless. And as you said, like, nobody's really 100% mastered or worked it out, but maybe there's nothing to actually work out. And because there's so many options out there, people can carve out that niche and create their own audience, and they can do the blanket approach and hit every possible platform and just make sure that they're completely exposed and have lots of content and really relish in that. Or people can just hone in on one platform and dominate and have a really successful in their world, you know, I'm trying to use a different word than career, but, you know, a really successful outcome of what they're passionate about, and honing in on something that makes sense for them. But there's no rules anymore. It's just, there's definitely things that work better than others, but it all comes down to the context of the individual, the music or the creative content that you've got, and the purpose behind it, and the type of person that you're trying to connect with as well. And there's just so, like, the combination of possible outcomes are just limitless. There's just it's never ending.
Yeah, man, I find it hard to disagree with everything you just said there. All right.
Drop the mic.
Yeah, exactly.
Man, well, I think we've hit the 2-hour mark. We have.
Fantastic.
I could keep talking for ages. We'll have to do a round 2, because when you drop that,
definitely,
you drop that stuff about maths and science as far as studying and having that background, there are so many questions I want to dig in on that. I think there's a lot of other band. I love talking about band stuff. And I just think that we could keep talking for ages. So we'll have to do a round 2, maybe later in the new year, and maybe when you got the new album out. Yeah. Hopefully we get it out at some point. It's so funny because people say, "Oh, I can't wait to hear the new album," and it's like, yeah, me too. Like, I have no idea what it's going to sound like yet. So, you know, we have finished one song on it. We've tracked vocals and everything for, and I sat back and listened to it, and I got excited about it, which is always the best part about recording an album. So, you know, we just have to kind of get through that process another 11 or 12 times. And I'm sure at some point, you know, like I said, my attitude is it'll be ready when it's ready. That's and, right. There's so much stuff coming out that there's really no point rushing anymore. It's not like there's some critical cutoff point, where if you don't make it before it, then your album will never get heard. But man, thank you so much for having me on. It was, like I said, I'm a big fan of the podcast, and I really, really enjoyed chatting. I look forward to doing it again. If you want to learn more about Leon or check out Ragdoll, have a bit of a sticky beak, you can go over to the show notes over at andysocial.net. You can go and search for Ragdoll on Facebook. You can also go to ragdollrock.bandcamp.com, where you can buy music and merch. I'll put a Spotify link as well. You can also search for Leon on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'll put all the links in the show notes. You can click through it on your podcast player as well. But make sure you check out Leon, reach out to him, let him know what you thought of this chat. As with all the podcast guests that have been on so far to date, please reach out to these people and find opportunities to support them if you really enjoy what they do and what they've got to say. It's the least that I can do to help these people that have sacrificed time to be on this podcast. So if you do like any of these guests, please reach out and let them know that you enjoyed the chat as well. Now, before we wrap it up, I am recording this a little bit in advance, but not too far in advance. From a band update, from the Lord perspective, we are still going through some final stages. I actually sent off some, should I mention this? I sent off some selected tracks that are almost final mixes to a person, I've got to be really careful, I don't want to slip any beans yet, to a person in Japan who is on the hunt to hopefully get us signed to a Japanese label again, because it's been a while since our last album and we've been independently releasing stuff for the past several years, and the Japanese market's changed quite a bit. So we have someone on the ground over there that's going around and showing some of our tunes to a few different people from different labels. So stay tuned. That is not delaying our release in any such way, but I thought I'd give you something to work with. We're just testing out the final mixes of the album on various stereo systems, on headphones, in cars, computer speakers, on big stereo systems in our homes, whatever it is, and we're trying to get a balance across all those different systems. So for anybody that's not in a band, one of the things that we try and do, and I know a lot of other artists do this as well, is that when you listen to a song on a particular device, sometimes you're going to get a slightly different representation of what that sound is. So the mixes change slightly, and I'm not technically minded in this sense, so I'm not going to explain this terribly well, but it sounds different in a whole range of different systems. So for us, we've got to try and find a balance to get it as close as possible so it's the most accurate representation no matter what you listen on. But for us, most of the time, people tend to listen to music through headphones these days. So it is tailored a little bit for headphones, but it's going to have a balance across all those different formats. So if you've got a big home stereo, it's going to sound schmick. If it's on computer speakers, it's going to sound schmick. If it's on your headphones, it's going to sound schmick. And if it's in your car, it's going to sound pretty good. So stay tuned for that. We're going through that, and hopefully we'll have some announcements soon. Video clips still being worked on. And there's a bunch of other stuff happening, but lots and lots of stuff in the pipeline, just waiting to hopefully get some stuff out to you guys ASAP. I put a little teaser actually. Sorry, I'm thinking on the fly here. If you guys follow me on Instagram, just keep an eye on my Insta stories, because I have been putting up some little teasers here and there. I put up a chorus for one of the songs off the album that hasn't been teased, or we haven't put any snippets up from that song to date. And I know a few of you noticed that. So what did you think? Shoot me a message. Stay tuned, and you can follow me on Instagram by searching at Andy Dowling, and watch my Insta stories, because I'll put a few little teasers up over the coming days and weeks as well, while we wait for this album announcement, which will come soon. So stay tuned. Moving on, Self-Starter, as mentioned at the beginning of the episode, season 1 is over. Season 2 is going to kick off in June. I am going to continue recording episodes for Self-Starter into the new year. So if you know anybody that could be a really good guest for Self-Starter, hit me up, let me know, and we'll see whether I can turn that into an episode. I'm going to continue to add more blog posts to the website, and I'm going to work on some other content behind the scenes, because the whole self-employment world is something that I'm really fascinated by, and something that I want to get better at myself. And a good way of doing that is creating content and creating different bits of information online that I can learn and get something out of, and in turn, hopefully pass on some value to other people, so people can follow me on my journey as I try and navigate this big world of self-employment. So if you're curious and you haven't checked it out yet, go over to selfstarter.com.au and go and give that a crack. But that's it, folks. That's another episode done. That is the first one for 2019. Lots of great guests coming up. Lots of really unusual guests. Some people that have been trying to pin down for so long, and they're getting closer. So some really cool people to come up. But as always, guest suggestions, flick me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, or shoot a message via andysocial.net, whatever it is. If you've got any guest recommendations or any feedback, Love to hear from you. And, well, that's it. I'm going to stop talking. Until next week, folks. Ta-ta. Take care. Bye-bye.